Today on Remington's Inside the Industry, I'll be talking to Dave Canterbury. Dave's website, Self-Reliance Outfitter, and his company, Pathfinder Survival, are dedicated to helping folks from all backgrounds, including hunters, master outdoor wilderness survival skills. Dave is a military veteran, as well as a well-known television personality, who is introducing his fans to skills that are not only useful, but could potentially save their lives. Trust me, you're going to enjoy the visit. This podcast is brought to you by Remington Firearms. For more information on the new era of Remington, visit our site at remarms.com. So, today I've got Dave Canterbury from Pathfinder Survival. Dave, welcome. Glad to have you on board.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Hey, look, we haven't really known each other very much. I got you through the guy that I just finished having a podcast with was Todd at Just a Mountain Dude. So tell me a little bit about Pathfinder Survival. Tell me about Pathfinder Survival.
So Pathfinder Survival is actually a school down here in Southeast Ohio, and it sprung from YouTube and things like that. And it's a school that teaches, I don't like to use the word survival necessarily all the time because it has connotations nowadays that I don't like. But
good,
really
excellent. Actually, sorry for interrupting, but that was one of the things I was going to say because I think there's the survival connotation. Sometimes you're absolutely right, is not necessarily taken in the right context.
No, it's not. And really what we teach here at the school, obviously we teach emergency survival in a 3-day scenario at our basic level classes. But what we really focus on here is making people better woodsmen, more comfortable in nature, better at when they go out and hunt and things like that, and they decide to camp for a couple of days at a hunting camp or a fishing camp, things like that. We try to make them more comfortable in that environment. And then if emergencies arise, they're better prepared to handle those type of emergencies, which in this day and age are considered survival scenarios. Now, obviously, really, survival is subjective in a lot of ways because what most people call survival nowadays, I would consider inconvenient camping. However, we've built a school around that. We built a brand around that.
Sorry. I'm just laughing a little bit because inconvenient camping is actually really a perfect scenario because, I used to go outside and I would love hunting really tough situations and being out in tough situations. Right now, if I'm out anything that's a little bit inconvenient, I would be surviving because I like my luxury now. So sorry for laughing or interrupting because I think that was spot on.
No, it's okay. I mean, I think that, a lot of people nowadays are in that same boat. I think we live in a world where comfort is the first thing we think about. And in the old days, it was the last thing they thought about was comfort. And they, just wanted to get through the night and make sure that they got up the next morning. And that's really where survival boils down to is, can you adapt to a scenario to be able to get through the next day? And so we do teach that. And that's really where Pathfinder Survival came from. It was the beginnings of a brand of a school. And so most of my, things online are Pathfinder Survival is basically the name for that as far as our school. When you look me up on YouTube, Instagram, all those types of things, Pathfinder Survival will bring up my name. But survival is really not the mainstay of our business. We're more of a self-reliance and woodsmanship outfitting business is what we really are. And we try to teach people to be better woodsmen. So I go back to that the old verbiage of woodcraft and camping, from the late 1800s to the early 1900s, mid 1900s, woodcraft and camping was a big thing. And all of those guys were hunters, they were fishermen, but they also were comfortable in the woods. And that's what we try to develop here at the school.
I think that's one of the things that Todd and I were talking about, that these are things that are kind of in the past generations. See these new young people that are out there, and they don't want to drive cars, they don't want this, they don't want that, but they often sometimes seem to forget where their food comes from.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, if you look at postings on social media, the ones that draw the biggest amount of negative comments or negative commentary are generally ones that are posted that have, game being harvested off the landscape. Unless it's fish. Evidently, fish don't have feelings, but deer do. I don't know what the difference there is, but
Yeah, look,
um,
that's you're absolutely right. I was fishing uh, up in a place called Haida Gwaii. So Haida Gwaii is used to be the Queen Charlotte Islands in northern Canada, kind of about 30 miles off the coast of Alaska. And I was fishing there maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and sitting at the table one night, and one of the women that was there, we were talking about fishing, and anyhow, what happened is somehow the conversation got to be, what do you do, and or where was I, something, and I mentioned hunting, and she was really kind of bothered her, and I said, so you think it's perfectly okay that you go and fight these salmon for 50 minutes or an hour, whatever that is, or you pull up a halibut for a gain an hour plus, and you think it's fine to do that and club them over the head, but you seem to think there's something wrong with me putting one bullet through an elk or something like that and utilizing the meat. How does that work? And she really didn't have a good comeback.
yeah, I think there's definitely a disconnect there with our society as far as the difference between even trapping. Trapping. I'm a big trapper. That's one of my favorite hobbies is trapping, and it's one of those things where it's wildlife management, it's property management. I've got 186 acres that I manage, and I've got a 4,000-acre wildlife area around it, and a huge cattle farm beside it. And that guy appreciates me trapping the coyote. The coyote decimate a lot of the population of not only game birds but also game animals like deer. And so, but people think that that's just the most horrible thing in the world to trap animals. And it's kind of like fishing's okay, hunting can be tolerated, trapping is absolutely a no-no. And where do you draw the line there? I don't understand the difference.
Well, I don't think they understand the difference either. They don't. Unfortunately, so many people they're like lemmings. Actually, they just follow along and follow along and follow along. They don't understand that conservation. You talk about conservation. Excuse me. Talking about conservation, I sit on the Dallas Safari Club board of directors, and we talk about conservation a lot because, conservation is one of the biggest things there is. They don't seem to understand that the sustainability of these animals is dependent on hunters and wildlife people like yourself, et cetera, because what happens is if that they would love to ban hunting. Well, if they ban hunting, that's the kiss of death for the animals as we know them. They'll disappear.
Right.
A friend of mine has a big concession in Mozambique, and when he took over that, and when I say big concession, I think it's 100,000 plus acres. I'm not sure exactly how big it is. They had less than, I believe, I don't recall exact numbers, but it was less than, I think, 200 plus Cape buffalo, and today he's got 25,000 Cape buffalo.
Wow.
And yet, what does he do? He hunts, and he sells hunts, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the conservation hunters have allowed that to happen. Yet they're being hunted more and more. You get rid of the hunters, and all of a sudden the poachers show up, and before you know it, there's no animals left because they
I
could
think
care less. Sorry.
I probably have a controversial viewpoint on some of the aspects of why hunting is beneficial. I mean, obviously, I can use my own land as an example. When I first bought this piece of property 10 years ago, I never saw a turkey. I never saw a rough grouse. I never saw things like that on the property. They weren't here. And as I started to trap the egg-eating type animals and the predatory animals, those things began to flourish. Now I have lots of turkey. I have lots of rough grouse. In fact, when I showed some pictures of rough grouse I had caught by hand to my local game warden, he just was like baffled that there was even rough grouse here, let alone that I was able to catch them by hand. But the thing with that is, in my opinion, I think that another part of this whole thing with hunting animals, hunting deer and things like that, if you look at, and I'm talking about fair chase hunting here. I'm not talking about fenced in hunting. I'm talking about fair chase on the ground, not at 500 yards from a blind. I'm talking about on the ground hunting up close personal. You're in that animal's personal space when you kill it. I think that in itself helps the animals do better because you're killing the animals that don't have the instincts they should have. You're killing the animals that may be the weaker animals in the breeding pool, in the breeding population. And so stronger animals come out of that because the smarter, the ones with the more instincts, the stronger, those animals breed, and they breed animals that are like that. Do you understand what I'm saying by that?
Yeah, no, and that's a point well taken. I think that is a good point. Now, I am going to battle you on one thing you said about high fence because I've heard this conversation forever. You know, high fence is terrible.
No, I'm not saying that high fence hunting is a bad thing.
No,
what
no,
I'm
but
saying to that is,
yeah, no, but
I don't think it has the same effect.
Yeah, but my point is this: that with high fence, I've got a very good friend that's got 12,000 acres, all high fence. He's got multiple high fence. He and I could drop you off, and this is in South Texas. I could drop you off there, and you have no idea, and you'll never find the fences again. You won't
No, I
see
believe
them
that.
all
I
day.
believe that.
Yeah.
And large areas like that, you know, I have a much better outlook on than some of the high fence areas. There's some high fence areas, especially in this area of Ohio, that I guarantee you less than 200 acres are fenced in.
Yes, no, I get that. I'm from Western Canada, and then I live in Texas now. So when I'm talking about size, we're talking about thousands of acres. So
I think there's a
understand
big
that.
difference there. I mean, those animals have a large habitat.
Yeah,
They're not having to necessarily bring animals in there unless they're breeder animals
right.
to actually throw in that fence for people to shoot.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get it. But one of the things, though, that I think it's really interesting that one of the things people kind of forget about conservation is when you're living a life like you are, what you're doing is you're managing your property and you're managing your herd, if you will, or you know. But what happens is it allows all the other things to flourish.
Correct.
You know,
To the point of the grouse and the turkey.
yeah, and that's one of the big things that people miss. Like, you know, people talk about conservation, blah 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 blah, and these big windmills. The number of birds that they kill is absolutely freaking outrageous. People seem to think that that's okay, you know,
Right.
because those windmills are making enough energy to light your bathroom for the next 3 hours, I guess. But it's
Right.
okay that they kill thousands and thousands of birds, or hundreds
Sure.
of thousands of windmills. It's unbelievable. Anyhow,
Yep.
I think people just don't grasp what's going on. So tell me about a little bit about Dave Canterbury. Where did you come from? How did you start this? Why did you start it, etc.?
You know, it's really kind of a strange thing. I mean, I grew up around different areas of the woods, the lakes, rivers, things like that. As I was growing up, I always had an interest in the outdoors, and I hunted and fished and trapped, you know, when I was young and things like that with my parents. But I think really my keener interest came from actually 18th century reenacting. Is where really the interest level peaked for me. Doing that reenactment of the 18th century, where you had very little accoutrements with you, and you were actually surviving and thriving off the landscape, not only to day-to-day survival, but also hunting and trapping and fishing and things like that, in primitive fashion. I think that's really kind of what piqued my interest in all of this stuff, and really got me to where I started making YouTube videos and things based around that, which led me to become, you know, a small outfitting business, which led me to become a survival school in the beginning, and then build a business around that. So I think that I would have to say that reenacting and more primitive things are what kind of brought me into this. But now I just flourish on the fact that, you know, teaching people to be more comfortable in the outdoors is really what I live for. I mean, I live to teach that stuff to people.
So how long are your survival schools there? Like you said, I think 3 days. Is that what you said earlier?
Yeah, it depends on the class. You know, our basic survival class is 3 days, our intermediate is 4 days, and our advanced is 4 days. And then we have several peripheral classes in there, from Bushcraft 101 to ropes and rigging to wilderness first aid, medicinal edible plants, primitive trapping, modern trapping. I have a modern trapping class coming up in about 3 weeks. Um, we'll have a modern trapping class out here as soon as the trapping season opens in Ohio. We had a primitive trapping class about 3 weeks ago. We just got done with an Appalachian folk skills class this past weekend. We have classes about 2 to 3 weekends a month, about 10 months out of the year.
Oh, good for you. That's really great. And how many people in a class?
It depends on the class. You're more skill based and resource intensive classes are usually 10 to 12. Classes like our basic class we have November 3rd weekend has 33 people signed up for it.
Geez, there's a lot of people taking some interest, isn't there?
Yeah. It's a growing interest, and I think that a lot of it has to do with people just want to get away from. They just want to get away from the city. They want to get away from stuff. They want to. It's almost goes. It's almost everything repeats in history, and I think we're right back to that time period when woodcraft and camping became large to begin with during the Industrial Revolution, when people were on a factory assembly line every day of the week, and they just wanted a break from that. They wanted to get back to their roots and back to nature. And I think we're starting to go into that situation again with people. And you can blame it on things like, oh, everybody's scared of the situation of the world, and everybody's worried about economic collapse and World War III and blah blah blah. And there's probably part of that is probably true, no question. But I also think, from talking to students that I have in here week in and week out, a lot of them just want to learn to be comfortable if they want to go camping and get away from day-to-day life for a while.
Yeah, I think the other part has something to do with things. I think there's a number of things. If you look at COVID, for instance, kind of follow hunting licenses, which I obviously do, being in the firearms industry. COVID there's two things that played a fairly significant role in it. First of all, a young generation of people, and I think that goes right through to the older, but mostly the young generation of people that are looking at wild caught food, whether it's fish or whether it's game birds or deer, whatever it is, being just really the healthiest
Right.
food that you can possibly get. And so looking at that as something that enhances their well-being, I think that plays a role in it. The second thing is COVID. We saw from the supply chain, a bunch of empty stores, not empty, but sort of empty, and people are saying, geez, I get better food, and I can look after myself a little bit. So there was fairly significant increases in hunting licenses over the last few years, especially birds. So I think that certainly plays a role. And then the other part I can absolutely buy into, that people just go, screw it, I need a break here. I need to get away from
Yeah.
my normal shit and do something else.
Yeah. No, I would agree with you 100% on all of that. I really would.
Yeah.
And I think it's strange that you have, you talk about this newer generation, and I agree with that 1,000%, because it's so strange to see, like we talked about in the very beginning, you've got this certain group of people that are completely against the hunting and the trapping and things like that. But then you have another whole group of that same generation that's like, that animals that come off the landscape that are not artificially raised are so much more healthy for my well-being. Why wouldn't I want that?
Yeah. Oh, look, the reality is it'd be kind of interesting to see, um, to go onto a campus sometime and ask 100 of them where they get their food from, because I wonder how many people actually even recognize that the beef that they buy, the cow has to get slaughtered.
Right. Oh, there's no question about that.
Like, I think that a lot of people, and it sounds really silly, but I'm not entirely sure that I believe that people really even give a thought about where their game comes from, or where their meat comes from, because I don't care what it is, it's got to be killed. And
Well,
I think
I think a
they
lot of
don't
that comes
recognize.
out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell people, because I'm a pretty serious hunter, but I hunt. I don't hunt for trophies. I hunt for meat. My freezer's full of all kinds of different meat. So that's what I hunt for. But the reality is I tell people sometimes, I said, look, if you want to, this one clean shot kills something. If you want to see some of these animals, what happens to them in the wild when they're not able to protect themselves, is the ugliest death that you could possibly imagine. So you should put your arms around a hunter because they've just saved that animal from that.
That's true.
It's look, you see a lot of them, especially in Africa, for instance. You know that lion or whatever it is, the leopard that kills something. It's not a kill. That's they'll get it on its back, and then the rest of them tear strips off it until it finally dies, and who knows, it could be hours. So it's just not a nice death at all. But I don't think the younger people, and I shouldn't say young people, I don't think people really pay much attention to where their food comes from.
No, I don't. I don't either. I mean, like I said, I think it's out of sight, out of mind. If I can go buy it in cellophane and styrofoam, then I don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
If I have to see somebody kill it or see it dead on Instagram or somewhere else, then it becomes reality to me, and it bothers me.
Yeah.
I think that's how people look at that.
So do a lot of the people that come to take your classes, are they, I guess, are they used to any of this, or are they? Yeah, I understand. Let's say the people that come to take your 101 classes, are they familiar with hunting, fishing, utilizing the game to survive?
Generally, I get both. Most of the time, I would say that's probably a no. I'd say probably 70% of the time that's a no, because we get a lot of people that are brand new into this coming to that level of class. But even when you get to classes like, let's just say Appalachian Folk Skills last week, last weekend, part of what we have them do is we bring in some live food like chickens and ducks, and they have to build a pen and they have to practice animal husbandry during the beginning of the weekend to take care of those animals, and then they have to butcher them and eat them a couple days later. We also make them name them on purpose. Right? Just to make sure that they understand, hey, this is I'm taking care of this animal, but I'm going to eat it. Right? And I think that when it comes down to that, you once in a while will get somebody who's a little squeamish about it, but most of the time, by the time they get to that class, it's either people who have done this stuff before, or they're like they really want to learn it and they're keen on it, and it's not going to bother them when the time comes. So I think we get a little bit of both out here.
Yeah. My family comes from a farming, ranching background, and so we're well used to that type of thing. But a lot of people just are not. They just
No, that's true. You're right.
Especially if they name it, I think it becomes much harder. So that's why I was laughing about it. If they name something and it's like, well, I can't kill Sally now, and eat her. So how long have you been doing this now, Dave?
About 13 years.
What did you do in life before that?
I was an automotive engineer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a big change from that to this.
Yes and no. It's funny that you say that, because I parallel process engineering and quality engineering to survival all the time, because I really think, and it's the same thing with trapping and hunting as well. Everything that you do in life has, you expect a certain outcome, right? And to get that outcome, to achieve that outcome, you have certain things that are critical inputs to make that happen, right? So you take hunting, for example, your critical inputs could possibly be a good scout, trail cams, understanding travel locations, understand bedding areas, understand feeding areas. And then you have to eliminate the variability within those critical inputs of, maybe that deer takes 2 different routes to go to a feeding area. Which one is he more likely to take? Which one is my trail cam says he's on the most? And then I'm going to put my stand or my blind there to intercept him between a feeding and a bedding area. So I've eliminated the variability within the process to get the desired outcome. And I think it's the same thing with survival. When I make a fire or build a shelter, I have certain critical inputs that I have to control the variation in to make the output the same every time. So it's really a parallel to engineering in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I can see that, but it's kind of a different lifestyle, meaning that, going out on your own, doing something like this versus going to a secure job.
There's no question.
There's
no question. When the first time I told my wife, I was going to quit my job to do this full time, she was like, "You're really not thinking about that, are you? You're kidding me."
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I'm serious heart attack." And she was like, "Well, I was in a position where, I'm a Six Sigma black belt, which is a quality.
Yeah, I know what it is.
Certification. Yep. You know what that is, right? Yep. Okay. So those kind of people don't have a hard time getting a job, obviously. So it was a chance but it was only a chance I had to take for a little while to see if it was going to pan out before I could go get another job if I had to.
Yeah. No, look, I think it's great. I love to see people that are doing something because they're passionate. I tell people in my own business, my own team that you have to have some passion towards, in our case, the firearms industry, or the firearms or hunting, because without that passion, you're just taking a check. That's all you're doing. I met a guy recently that I was in Orvis buying a fishing rod, a fly fishing rod, and was new guy who's only been there for a couple of months, and he was a sales manager of a big transportation company. He said, I love fly fishing, and he said, I just said one day, I said, screw it, I want to do something that I love in my life now. So he quit his job, went to work for Orvis. He's not making, I don't know what they make, I have no idea, but he's enjoying life.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I enjoy life every single day now, and I don't wake up a single morning regretting what I'm doing. So I think, my father always told me, if you don't love what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing it,
Yep, and
no matter what that job is.
yeah,
So,
probably the best advice that you had.
yeah, I would say so.
So, look, I have to give a plug to Remington because I know you recently got a Remington gun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I got an 870 Fieldmaster, and you guys were kind enough to send me an extra 20 and 21-inch barrel for that thing, and I really love it for the Eastern Woodlands. I mean, it's kind of a different style of hunting that I do because I'm not typically I guess I'm not the typical hunter because I'm kind of ADD, so it's hard for me to sit in one spot very long.
And
So I tend to,
look, I get that. I don't know if I'm ADD, but I do know I hate sitting in a blind.
yeah. So I tend to
refuse
walk
to do
around
it.
a lot,
Yeah, me too.
and the Eastern Woodlands is really thick, even still yet this time of year. It's still pretty thick in here, and so I wanted something I could swing well. It was that 21-inch barrel gives me that, but I wanted something that would punch through the canopy during squirrel season to get these early season squirrels. And so he sent that to me with a dove choke, and it works amazing. I have not missed a single squirrel in the last since I got that gun, so I'm really impressed with it.
So I'm going to ask you, because I asked Todd this very thing an hour ago. Kind of Todd's favorite meat. What's your favorite wild meat?
Um, Honestly, you probably wouldn't believe it if I told you. Possum.
Really?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
No, I don't believe it. I've never heard anybody say that before. You
Yep.
must have a great way of cooking it, or you got
Well,
really
I just
bad
don't think
taste.
people probably haven't eaten enough possum. I mean, it really is a white meat. It's very much like pork, and it's got a really really good flavor to it if you cook it right. I like it.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I've never heard that before. Because I asked Todd the same thing, and because he's shot lots of squirrel. His was rabbit, so we got rabbit
Yeah.
and
See,
possum.
I'm not a big fan of rabbit. It's just too lean of a meat for me.
And possum is not that lean.
No, no, there's plenty of fat on a possum, especially late in the year.
I'll be darned. Had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like possum really, really well. Yeah, it's good, and I'm sure that's an answer you probably would never get from 100 other people you talk to, but because I try to live what I teach, and because I try to if I trap an animal, and it's edible, I eat it. I've even eaten coyote on film. It doesn't bother me. I don't eat every coyote obviously I catch because I'm doing property management, but I'm not afraid to eat them either. I've eaten skunk. I've eaten all of it.
Yeah, which I think people should do. I don't think people should. Don't throw shit on something that until you've tried it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember reading something recently because one of my favorites is mountain lion. I think they're just fabulous.
I've heard that. I've never eaten one, but I've heard that they are good meat.
Yeah, they're really good meat. But like so many things, it's whatever is how it's cooked makes a big difference. But I don't think people should start saying this isn't good. I wouldn't eat that or such. Like people should try everything that you get.
Yeah, I mean, you would be if you've never eaten skunk before, you'd be shocked at how skunk tastes compared to the way they smell.
Well, they'd have to taste a lot different. But yeah, I can believe it.
I mean, the meat is actually sweet.
Really.
Yeah, it is. It has a sweet flavor to it.
Yeah, but how do you get past the part the skunk the smell to start getting
Well,
the
you
meat in the
just
first place?
well, you just try not to let it spray before you kill it. Number one, and then
Yeah,
when you
of
skin it,
course.
you're careful how you skin it.
Yeah, yeah, that would be disastrous if it sprayed as you were skinning.
Oh, well, no, no.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
No,
mean, I've had them spray themselves in traps and spray around the area before I killed them, and you can wash them and you can get that smell off of them before you skin them anyway.
right. No, I shouldn't say I'd be surprised because I've had some meat. I don't think I've really ever had anything that I didn't like. There were some things that you say, yeah, I'm not sure that I'd have it again, but but I recently had because I was hunting in Africa, so I've had zebra, I've had Cape buffalo, which are usually two of the meats that you don't hear people talk about very often, but they were both really really good.
Yeah, I
Uh,
believe that. I believe that.
and like I said, mountain lion. I read a really great article recently about mountain lion, and some stupid woman wrote a story for I don't remember the New York Times or whatever it was about people don't eat mountain lion, and Rochelle Shoot, I think her name is. She responded to it and she said, "Well, that's BS. Mountain lion is just a fabulous meat. I eat it all the time," and on and on and on. So, but I think that people should eat what they catch or what they shoot. Otherwise, I don't think you should do it. And I think, from the shooting standpoint, I think this the terminology trophy hunting, just like survival, makes a connotation that people think you chop the head off a trophy off an animal that you've harvested, and you just leave everything else there, and they're just so wrong. Trophy hunting, the people keep the horns of something they've shot, but every other square inch is usually utilized.
Right, right.
Um, so, what about your most advanced course? Where does that kind of walk me through? The first one is kind of newbies, and the second one is more advanced. Third, how many different courses have you
Well, we
got?
have three. We have about 11 different courses, but the three main survival courses that we have are the basic, intermediate, and advanced. And so the at the basic level, really, I think a lot of it is based on how much you utilize the landscape to your advantage and how well you can navigate. Because I'm a big believer in navigation being probably the biggest skill any woodsman should have. Because if you can navigate, unless you're traumatically injured or you can't move, you're not stuck. You don't have to wait to be rescued if you have any sense of direction or any sense of where you came from. Most of the time, I mean, unless you're on a hunt somewhere, out west where you've walked in 12 or 14 miles one direction, most people in the U.S., squirrel hunt, rabbit hunt, pheasant hunt, deer hunt, they're not walking more than a quarter of a mile or a mile or two away from their vehicle. And even if you were on a logging road somewhere scouting a hunting location and you turned your four-wheeler over or it broke down and you were 6 or 7 miles in, you've got a road you can walk down to get out if you have to.
Right.
Right. So I think that navigation is a big portion of that. And so a lot of that's part of why it's called the Pathfinder School. Pathfinding is navigation.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of our school here is learning how to navigate the landscape.
Yeah.
And so those classes build on that to the point where you can actually go into an area with no map whatsoever and create your own map of the area based on your exploration of an area. And that's at the advanced level. And then also being able to do things like make fire directly off the landscape with no other implements, being able to reconstruct things like shelters, containers, cordage, all the most important items of survival off the landscape. That's what the advanced class is really all about. And the basic class is really about what do you have in your backpack, why is it in there, and how can you best utilize it for a survival scenario.
It's I grew up in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, and they people die there all the time, yearly, and not as much now, but always have. And 99% of the time, it was because they got lost.
Right.
And just the simple things like, look, if you're lost and you walk a little bit and you find a creek or a river, follow it because it's going to take you someplace.
Right.
But I think that's a huge thing. So I think that's spot on. So what's the next one? So what's the intermediate one?
So the intermediate one kind of starts to combine from the basics. So you start to use less kit items and you rely more off the landscape. You're trying to find better tinder sources off the landscape, better resources off the landscape to build a more elaborate shelter. Things that you can do to signal for rescue using landscape materials, not just what's in your kit. Things that you can utilize, more natural navigation techniques that don't rely so much on walking straight lines with a compass, but more using the landscape like you talked about with river and creek systems, as well as ridge lines and things like that to get high ground, ridge lines to travel, things like crap, I lost my train of thought, but things like navigation by the landscape. So looking at the terrain and being able to navigate the terrain by using it to your advantage and not just having to walk straight line distances because you have a compass. Now I've got to walk through, a 10-mile briar thicket when I could walk around that thing somehow using the landscape to navigate and stay on the same ridge line and just keep that in mind, or stay in the same valley and keep that in mind. And travel in a certain direction by using the shadows and the light of the sun and things like that, and not base so much of your navigation on I've got to walk a straight line with this compass or I can't get where I'm going.
Yeah, it's as I said, when I grew up, and actually most of my life, whenever I go back to Canada, it's the same. I go into the mountains, but the number of people that would go into the mountains just for a drive on the weekend, especially during the winter, and want to go off the main path, off the highway system, and they don't have a basic survival kit with them, which is just bizarre to me. Well, as a kid growing up and as an adult, we would never even consider driving into the mountains without having some form of survival kit in the vehicle. It just stayed in the vehicle all the time, but over the years that seemed to disappear, and then people.
That's right.
There's certainly in the mountains and I don't know about where you are in Ohio, but I lived in upstate New York. You can have a huge snowfall come and all of a sudden get stuck. I think it's challenging in some areas, but just the thought that to go someplace without a survival kit is beyond me.
Yeah, and that's the first thing that we teach at the basic level classes. How do I build this kit that I'm going to have with me that's not going to take up a lot of weight or take up a lot of room, and I've got to carry it. But even if I go for a day hike in the Daniel Boone National Forest or something, and I'm going to do a 20-mile loop trail, there's a chance I could get lost. Have I got the basic items with me for fire, shelter, and making potable water? Have I got those things with me? And can I signal for rescue if I need to?
Yeah.
Exactly. If you've got those bases covered, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the advanced course? Where does
the advanced course is more, you create 90% of the things that you need off the landscape. From fire to shelter to making potable water. And you also learn to recreate or use things that are less desirable. In a basic class, we teach people to carry the right tools for the right job all the time. And in the advanced level class, you may get stuck with only a pocket knife to do everything you have to do. Because in reality, a lot of people aren't going to walk in the woods with a belt knife unless they're hunting. In reality, most people would just throw a pocket knife in their pocket and say, yep, I'm good. I'm going for a hike. And then if you get stuck, that knife is what you got.
Actually,
so
I'm not
how
sure.
Do I utilize that?
I'm not sure that I agree with that, Dave, because I think most people wouldn't even throw a pocket knife in their pocket.
What's that?
I'm not sure that most people would even throw a pocket knife in their pocket. I think they go out for a hike and they don't think of anything. They might have water. Other than that, I think the vast majority of people go out for a hike. They don't put a pocket knife in. They don't put anything to light anything in. And whatever is, they have no way of getting more water. I think they just go out and they don't think of this at all.
Well, I think you do have that. But when it comes to this class that we're talking about, the advanced class, we've already taught them that you're supposed to carry a pocket knife every day, right? They already know this. So now we're teaching them how to utilize even less items than they would have normally in case something. What would happen to, let's say you've got this perfect survival pack, but you've got your pocket knife in your pocket and you've got a couple other things, maybe a cigarette lighter in your pocket, and you've got some cordage stuffed in your pocket somewhere, and you're in a canoe and you dump the canoe and your pack washes away with the canoe. Now all I've got is what's in my pocket. How do I survive with that?
I don't know. I hope my sat phone is still there.
So, that's kind of where the advanced level class goes into. And it goes into some other things that are a little bit more deep diving in that. We've had people actually harvest coal off the landscape out here and make a improvised forge and actually forge a knife from a piece of metal scrounged off the landscape that had to be able to cut cordage to be able to pass the class.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Pretty
Yeah.
innovative.
So
Hey, so now I'm sure you've seen it, the TV series Alone.
yep.
What do you think of it?
Um, I haven't watched the recent ones, and I understand that they're starting to take some large game animals and things like that alone. But I have there's a lot of people that have been on that show that have been to my school or were former instructors at my school or have taught with me at my school. So I know quite a few of the early season people that were on that show. And I think in the beginning, it was more of a starvation contest than it was anything else because of the legalities of where they were putting these people and what they were actually allowed to do. So I think there's a lot of that show in the beginning, at least, that you had to take with a grain of salt because it's not like you could just shoot the first thing or kill the first thing you came across because it might not be legal.
Right.
And so I don't think that's a reality when it comes to survival. And then a lot of that was, the pick of the what your location was. Did you put me on a salmon run or did you put me in an area where there's nothing?
Right.
Right. And I think I think that had a lot to do with the people who did better or worse on that show than others in the beginning as well. Now, like I said, I haven't watched the later seasons of that show. I understand there has been some big game animal kills in that show and things like that. I think it's a shame, and I don't know that this is the fact now because I haven't watched it, but from what I've heard, I think it's a shame that they're only allowed to use archery type equipment, fishing equipment, and nobody's allowed to have a firearm.
Yeah, they don't allow that, which is a shame. I think it's. I agree with you at the beginning. I watched a few seasons and I thought it was really pretty interesting. Mostly because I knew the area that they were in.
Right.
I know Vancouver Island very
Vancouver,
well.
right.
I know northern British Columbia, northern Canada really well, northern Alberta really well. So it was interesting, but I think you're right. You get dropped in a certain location, and some people just have the luck of the draw, and they're dropped there, and they've got fantastic fishing. And somebody dropped, 2 miles away, he's got absolutely nothing.
Yep.
So I think you're right. And what happens with it is you look at some people, they get dropped someplace, and the fishing is just phenomenal. Somebody a mile or 2 miles away, they couldn't catch a fish to save their soul,
Right.
regardless of what equipment they had or didn't have. But the thing I always found interesting with it is what different people would do first, second, third,
Right.
and because I think, in my opinion anyway, that plays a big part of that type of survival. What's the first? Because when you first find yourself in a situation like that, what's the first thing to do? Because this is a question I'm asking you because that's when you've got the greatest amount of energy. So what do you do first?
Well, here's my opinion on that. I think it is dependent on a lot of things. You have to remember that those people go into that scenario knowing they're there long term, right?
Yes.
And that changes. My mentality would change completely if I knew that, as opposed to thinking, hey, somebody's going to come and get me in 3 days, or I'm just going to have to spend the night tomorrow. I'm walking out.
Right.
So I think that the mentality of the basic 5 survival priorities short term are self-aid is always first. If I'm bleeding, there's nothing else I need to fix before that, right? Because I can bleed out in a very short amount of time, especially an arterial bleed.
Yep.
So that's number one. Number two is shelter, because that includes my clothing. Is that stuff squared away? Do I need to build a shelter? How big a shelter, how elaborate shelter do I need to build? Maybe it's just a tarp. Maybe it's just a reflective blanket that I can use in conjunction with my fire for radiant heat source. So then fire is my next priority, and then water. And then my final priority, once that's squared away, is how am I going to signal for rescue, or am I going to plan to navigate my way out in a day or two or in the morning? If I'm there and I know I'm there for a long time, then I've got a lot longer time to prepare some of those things depending on the weather, which changes everything. If the weather's bright, sunny day, and I know it's not going to get below 40 tonight, and I'm dressed well, and I've got a tarp I can throw up in minutes, then maybe the first thing I'm going to do is scout the area and see where the best locations are to find food, because that may be the thing it takes the longest to accomplish. And if it takes me the longest to accomplish that, and I spend the first 5 or 6 days burning my calories, burning my energy level to build an elaborate shelter, get a fire going, and all those types of things, now it's going to be that much longer before I got food. when I could have went out and done some type of passive fishing on day one or passive trapping on day one, and then took my time building my shelter and my fire while those things were working in the background to feed me after the fact. Do you understand what I'm saying by that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I feel like a hero now because that's what I've said too. I see these people building these, like the ones that I've watched, and some of these people start building these elaborate shelters right away. And by the time they've got their shelter done, by that time there's so many calories in deficit that it's
Right.
unbelievable. When to
Correct.
me, the first thing to do, unless to your point, unless the weather is really awful, the first thing to do is to get some regular source of energy. Otherwise you'll just you can have the most beautiful shelter, but if you've got nothing to eat, it's meaningless.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of that comes with the fault. I think a lot of the fault in that, or a lot of the mentality of that, comes from social media. I hate to say it, but because social media is my livelihood in a lot of ways, as it is people like Remington and big brands like that. But I think that in this genre, in the survival bushcraft genre, the videos that people watch are these big elaborate shelter builds, and so they think that that is a priority over everything else. Is I've got to build that type of shelter, and the reality is most of these people building those shelters on these videos and things like that are never even staying in them. And if they are, it's for one night, and they spent all these calories to build it for a great video for a lot of views that they never utilized. When they should be teaching people with these videos, these are really your priorities. You can set up a very simple shelter and last for a week, no problem, unless it's minus 20 outside. But if it's in the 40s, 50s, and it's not going to get below freezing at night, a very simple shelter will do the job while you're taking care of your longer term priorities. And then you can always come back once you've got calories in the bank to build a more elaborate shelter that you plan to stay in longer term.
Well, with a show like Alone, and again, I haven't really, I watched it pretty regularly for the first few seasons, but like that, and I haven't watched it recently, but with that, they put them in early enough in the season that they're not going to get the terrible minus 10, 20, 30
Right.
weather. So I looked at it all the time saying, well, why are these people building these big, massive, beautiful shelters when they probably got 30, maybe 45 days before the weather's going to really get awful?
Right. Right.
So
I agree with you.
yeah.
100%. I agree.
So I'm not a survival person at all, but I've spent enough time in the outdoors that I know, and the same as you, there's certain things that you have to do first, but I'm pretty sure on a show like that where I was there planning for 60, 90 plus days that I would not be building that big shelter at the beginning.
I absolutely would not do that. Now, you also have to realize that some of that is probably dictated to them somewhat because even though they're filming themselves, there are people checking on their well being on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis. And you can bet that somebody along the line is probably saying, hey, if you really want to make your character interesting, or if you really want to be seen on the show, a lot of times you're really going to have to do something cool so we can have it on film. And something cool is not a tarp that I'm laying under, 8 hours a night, and the rest of the time I'm spent out setting traps, setting fishing nets, and things like that. That's not the cool factor. The cool factor is shelter and fire. And that, again, I think a lot of that is the fault of social media.
Yeah, no, you're probably right, and I don't. Nobody really knows what the producer is saying that you have to do when you have to do it. Excuse me. But and then I haven't followed it recently in the last couple of years, I guess, because one of the things that I saw then is it's like so many things that you see on television now. We want a certain type of person. We want this person here. They should have some sort of emotional trauma that's happened in their life. This person here should
Right.
have, instead of just taking who the 10 best people for this are, they have to have something more.
Right.
Which to me is absolutely bizarre. So you've said some of your instructors or some of the people that have attended, any one of them that eventually won it?
No, no. I did have one that came in second,
Right.
but none that have won it. No.
Yeah. Look, I think who wins it often is just chance. There's some people I saw that were really really good, and one guy got an infection, which
Right.
really hard not to, uh, you know. But because of the fun part I had is always saying, okay, who's going to last the longest?
Right.
you know. And I think I was right only once, twice, you know, because you just never know, like I said, I think there's what you don't know is what the producers told them to do. But so it was interesting to find out what you thought was the most important. And I think obviously I don't know much about about your survival, but it's interesting that you say that it really depends. If you're trying to survive in a scenario where you're going to be there for 2 or 3 days and that's it, is much different than something that you plan on being long term.
Yeah, I tell people all the time at the basic level class, if food is your priority in 3 days, you got a problem, because it shouldn't be. Food has no bearing on a 3-day survival scenario. You shouldn't even be considering it, right? But once it becomes longer than a week, you better be thinking about food, and you better be thinking about that right off the bat.
Yeah. Well, I think you better be thinking water right away too.
Oh, there's no question. Water is always a priority in a survival scenario, even if it's only 3 days. It's still
Exactly.
water's in that priority list. But as far as those 5 main priority levels of survival for short term, food doesn't play a part.
Right. No. Look, I could lose. I could go for a week without food. I'd probably come out looking a lot better than I went in.
No doubt. No question about that. Me and you both, buddy.
Because I enjoy my food.
Yeah, me and you both.
Dave, look, this has been a very interesting discussion. I'm going to cut it off now.
Okay.
Tell us, just tell the listeners how they can reach you, where to find you, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. So you can find my outfitting store, Self Reliance Outfitters, is at selfrelianceoutfitters.com. Most of my social media channels are under either Woodland Bushcraft or Pathfinder Survival, or you can just punch my name in and you'll find most of them.
And that's Dave Canterbury.
Yes, sir.
Dave, thanks for your time. It was great meeting you, having a discussion with you. I learned a lot and enjoyed the conversation.
Hey, I appreciate it, and I look forward to working with you guys, buddy.
All right. Thanks, Dave. See you.